Hey everyone, Dan Addy here, Engineering and Technical Sales for Detroit Speed, and today we're going to show you how to install our Detroit Speed Subframe Connectors for the 1979 to 93 Foxbody Mustang application. Our engineer Blake Tomlinson is going to show you how to get it done. Raise the vehicle a few feet off the ground so the underside may be accessed. Begin by properly supporting the vehicle under the rear axle and the front lower control arms to avoid tension in the body when installing the connectors. Disconnect the negative battery cable and remove the seats, carpet, and padding. Any interior panels that you are concerned with being damaged should be removed or masked to protect them from grinding and welding sparks. Drill out or remove the body clips holding the fuel and brake lines in place. Remove the brake line clamp from underneath the vehicle on the passenger side and remove the fuel and brake lines away from the floor. The brake and vent line will need to be cut and spliced to pass through the passenger side subframe connector. Remove a section of the heat sound deadening material from the floor where it will need to be cut out for the connector. Use a knife to locate 1 inch on either side of the stamp bead, continued to the frontmost edge of the floor pan and about 2 inches into the toe board. Remove the seam sealer at the front and rear corners of the floor pan at the rocker in order to take measurements from this area. Clean the floor pan cut area. Remove the foam from the top of the front seat crossmember. To locate the outboard subframe connector location, mark on both sides of the base of the front seat crossmember at 9 inches measured off the inside of the rocker. To locate the inboard subframe connector location, mark on both sides of the base of the front seat crossmember at 11 1/4 inches measured off the inside of the rocker. Mark on both sides of the base of the seat crossmember at 8 inches measured off the inside of the rocker. Mark on both sides of the base of the seat crossmember at 12 1/2 inches measured off the inside of the rocker. Draw a cut line around the seat crossmember at these marked locations. This section will be cut out to give you enough room to have welding access for the subframe connector. Using a cutoff wheel, remove the middle section of the seat crossmember at the base and between the marked lines from the previous steps flush to the floor pan. Remove this piece and save it for later. From the front side of the base of the seat crossmember, measure forward 21 7/16 inches and mark the location on the toe board. Measure inboard from the rocker 9 1/4 inches and mark the location. Using the location marked in the previous step, draw a straight cut line rearward past the seat crossmember area. Mark the inboard cut line by offsetting the cut line from the previous step 2 inches inward. Mark 2 locations and draw a straight cut line between the 2 points. Draw a perpendicular line to connect the 2 cut lines at the front toe board. Measure back 27 1/4 inches from the front cut line and mark the rear cut line. Using a cutoff wheel and reciprocating saw, remove the top layer of the floor pan section inside the cut lines. Be careful not to cut into the frame rail. Be certain to only cut the top layer of the floor pan. Remove the floor pan bracket underneath the cut area. Grind the floor pan cut line smooth. Grind away any burrs in the channel where the front subframe connector will sit. Continue to remove the top floor layer under the seat crossmember using a cutoff wheel. Cut in front of the rear cut line where the floor pan drops down to remove this section of floor. From underneath the vehicle, cut a square shape through the floor behind the seat riser for the subframe connector pass-through. Make sure you have sharp edges at the corners and fix any dents in the factory rail. The connector needs to sit as flush to the channel as possible. Place one of the front subframe connectors into the channel in the floor. Use a soft hammer to tap it gently forward and down into the channel. Mark a location at the base of the rear seat riser, 8 3/16 from the inside rocker. Use this mark in the front connector to draw a straight cut line on the floor pan. Measure 2 inches inboard of the cut lane from the previous step and mark a few locations on the floor pan. Use these marked locations along with the inboard side of the front connector to draw a straight cut line. Remove the rubber grommet in the floor. Using a cutoff wheel, remove the section of the floor pan between the cut lines. From underneath the vehicle, mark a location on the front side of the lower link pocket 2 inches outboard of the frame rail. Mark another location 2 inches above. Project another location using a straight edge leveled off the floor pan on the front side of the lower link pocket. Draw a vertical line connecting this mark with the first marked location in the previous step. Draw a horizontal line connecting the marked location intersecting with the vertical line in the previous step. Transfer a cut line onto the bottom side of the lower link pocket using the vertical line as a reference. Draw another cut line on the bottom side of the lower link pocket in line with the outside frame rail and parallel to the cut line drawn in the previous step. Cut this section out using the drawn lines for reference. Draw a cut line on the bottom side of the lower link pocket connecting the outboard corner that was cut in the previous step and 1/4 inch from outside of the lower link pocket. Cut out this section using the drawn lines for reference. Bend the sheet metal flat so the rear subframe connector assembly will sit flush in the vehicle. Measure in the center of the frame rail in the lower link pocket and mark the location. Draw a straight vertical line using this mark. Measure up 1 inch from the bottom edge of the lower link pocket and mark the intersection. Measure up another 2 inches and mark a second location intersecting the vertical line. Drill 2 pilot holes at the marked locations from the previous step. Using a rotor broach or a small hole saw, drill a 3/4 inch hole at both of these locations. You could also drill 3 3/8 holes on the surface if you don't have a 3/4 rotor broach, as these will just be plug weld holes. At the front of the frame, drill a pilot hole in the middle of the frame rail where the doubler plate overlaps the frame. Using a rotor broach or hole saw, drill a 3/4 inch hole at this location. Be careful as you drill the 3/4 inch hole as you will cut through the doubler plate first and then the frame rail material. Let the tool do the cutting so it doesn't move off location. You could also drill 2 3/8 holes on the surface if you don't have a 3/4 inch rotor broach, as these will just be plug weld holes. Mark 2 hole locations through the floor pan from underneath the vehicle, starting 3/4 inch in front of the lower link pocket. The second hole will be located 1.5 inches forward of the first hole. Then, drill out the pilot holes from underneath the vehicle. Using a 3/4 inch rotor broach, finish drilling from inside the vehicle. The holes will be through the frame rail flange directly above the rear torque box. Install the rear right-hand subframe connector assembly from underneath the vehicle so it meets up with the back of the front subframe connector assembly. Use a clamp to hold the torque box assembly in place. Based on variation of this body style, the front connector may need to be trimmed, since it is a straight cut and the rear connector is not, to allow a gap between the front and the rear connector. Place the seat crossmember section that was cut out onto the front subframe connector and measure the distance it sits above the seat crossmember. Draw a cut line onto the seat crossmember section from the bottom edge with that measurement. Measure the width the seat crossmember section needs to be cut by putting it back in place and transferring cut lines from the subframe connector onto the sheet metal. Use a pair of snips to cut out a pocket to fit over the subframe connector. Place the seat crossmember section back over the connector and make sure it fits around the connector. Remove the front and rear frame connectors. Prepare the floor pan on the top and bottom side for welding by removing all paint and dirt and as much aluminized coating as possible. Place the front subframe connector into the channel in the floor pan. Make sure it is clean of any debris. Tap the connector forward and down until it is seated in place. From underneath the vehicle, prepare for welding by grinding a smooth, clean surface around the 3 existing holes. Weld the connector in place using these holes. Weld the back of the front connector to the end of the channel in the floor pan. From inside the vehicle, weld along the front and sides of the front connector to the floor pan. Reposition the section of seat crossmember that was removed and place it over the subframe connector. Tack weld it in place and then finish weld around the seat crossmember and connector. Position the rear subframe connector assembly from underneath the vehicle so it lines up with the back of the front connector. Tap the torque box assembly of the rear connector up into the place using a hammer. Be sure all brake and fuel lines are out of the way. Place a clamp between the floor pan doubler and the vehicle to hold it in place. Tack weld both sides of the front and rear connector together. Clamp the torque box assembly on the rear connector to the vehicle. Install the stock trailing link bolt through the torque box assembly and lower trailing link hole in the vehicle and tighten. From inside the vehicle, tack weld the torque box assembly through the existing hole in the floor pan. The inner wheel tub has been removed in this video. Using a piece of wood, put pressure on the floor doubler of the torque box to hold it tight to the vehicle. Tack and plug weld the torque box assembly in place. Finish weld the floor doubler to the vehicle. Reposition the clamps to finish plug welding the torque box assembly to the vehicle. Weld around the rear connector to the floor pan in front of the torque box from underneath the vehicle. Finish welding the torque box assembly to the lower link pocket. Weld the floor pan doubler to the bottom of the frame rail. Rosette weld the lower link pocket to the torque box assembly. Install the subframe connector seat mount around the rear connector using the provided M10x30 hex head flange bolts and nuts. They will install in the factory seat location from the bottom side of the floor pan. Tighten the M10 fasteners and then weld the seat mount bracket to the rear connector. From inside the vehicle, weld the rear connector to the floor pan above the seat mount. From inside the vehicle, rosette weld the two 3/4 inch holes you drilled earlier. This will weld the floor pan to the top of the torque box assembly and frame rail. Weld the rear seat riser around the rear connector where it passes through. From inside the vehicle, weld the sides and top of the front and rear connector together. From underneath the vehicle, weld the floor pan around the rear connector on both sides. Repeat this subframe connector installation process for the opposite side of the vehicle. After all welding and grinding is complete, paint the newly installed subframe connectors and surrounding areas as desired to protect from corrosion. We also recommend using seam sealer as needed. Reinstall the fuel line with pop rivets, being sure to gently reshape the fuel line where it crosses the connector. We have finished the installation of your subframe connectors. You can now reinstall the interior. Thanks for watching our install video on our Detroit Speed Subframe Connectors for the 1979 to 93 Foxbody Mustang platform. If you have any questions, please call us at 704-662-3272 or visit us at the web or any of our social media outlets.